Food technology paper is worth 100 marks and you've got an hour and 45 minutes to do it. So that roughly works out that you've got 1 minute to spend per mark available. You must answer every question. It's worth having a go at absolutely everything because every 2 marks that you get right counts for 1% of your total grade. Section A is a nice comfortable beginning to the paper because that's where we get our 20 question multiple choice section. Make sure that you are shading in the lozenge shape for the correct answers. Ticks won't count. If you don't know the answer, have a go at the question anyway. You can use a process of elimination or you can work it out by playing odd one out. Once you get to section B, the questions get a bit longer, and that's where you should use the mark scheme to help you structure your answers. If you find an 8-mark question, make sure that you're giving 4 points and 4 explanations. And if you see a 6-mark question, it should be 3 points and 3 explanations. If you see a question where you're asked to discuss, you need to try to show a balanced argument. Try to show 2 sides of the story and try to make sure you're talking about each side the same amount. When it comes to the section A questions, it's really short, sharp information for you to revise and for you to recall from things that you already know. So you must know what dietary fibre is and why we need to eat it. Part of the reason we need to eat it is for energy, and if you remember, there is always a question about the percentage of recommended energy that we should be gaining from the nutrients that we eat, or the macronutrients that we eat. So you need to memorise those 15, 35 and 50% boundaries. There is a quick question about raising agents, and my top tip is that you remember that steam can be a raising agent for products that you bake in the oven. There's also a quick question about gelatinisation, which is the process that we use to thicken a sauce. And we have rehearsed the longer answer of this question lots and lots in the past. Another quick question is about plasticity of fats and the idea that fats melt to a certain degree in heat, and that allows us to spread them more easily. We have done quite a lot of work about the vitamins in recent lessons and all of the other micronutrients as well. It is crucial that you know the names, functions and sources of the water-soluble and the fat-soluble vitamins. If you've taken your food book home with you, then you'll know that you've got mind maps in your book to help you develop flashcards to help you remember these. You need to know all of the fat-soluble vitamins in detail, the water-soluble vitamins, as long as you know what the group of B vitamins do and vitamin C separately, that's enough information. The particular mineral that you do need to know a little bit more about in this particular paper is sodium and salt. So you've got some information to read on the slide here. You do also need to, though, have awareness of all of the other minerals. So I've listed them here for you to find out what they are supposed to do to the body. Remember that calcium is always paired with vitamin D and iron must always be paired with vitamin C for those vitamins to work effectively. Some foods are fortified with extra micronutrients to help the health of the nation, and it tends to be the staple foods that we're more likely to eat all the time. So you need to spend some time pausing on this slide to try and remember some of the foods that might be fortified. A topic that crops up in both parts of the paper, so in the quick response questions and also the longer answers, is the growth of microorganisms. Some microorganisms we don't want to grow, the ones that would cause us food poisoning. Some microorganisms we encourage to grow, things like yeast, so that bread can develop. Whatever the type of microorganism, they all need the same 5 conditions in order to multiply. They need a warm temperature, they need moisture, they need food, they need time, and they need a neutral on the alkali acidic range. In terms of food safety, temperatures are massively important, and you need to remember the key temperatures of the danger zone. So the danger zone begins at 8 degrees and goes up to 63 degrees. 75 degrees is the soonest, the coolest temperature that we can guarantee bacteria will be killed. So all food, whether it's being cooked for the first time or reheated, needs to reach 75 degrees. Fridge food must be kept at no more than 5 degrees, and anything in the freezer should be stored at minus 18 degrees. One of the methods that encourages food to look as though it is going off is a condition called enzymic browning, which happens when fruits or vegetables are cut open and the oxidation happens when oxygen causes the chemical composition of the food to change and we get a brown effect. It's important that you know where bacterial contamination can begin. So that's from all meats, there are high risk foods, and seafoods. You might contaminate through work surfaces and equipment. You might cause contamination yourself and other people cooking if there's pests in the kitchen, such as flies, and through waste food and rubbish. In lessons, we've revised how we should prepare, cook and serve food, and how we know that we are going to make sure our personal hygiene information that we write down gets us maximum scores. So remember, if you say that somebody should wash their hands need to be washed in hot soapy water for you to get the mark. If you quite rightly say that somebody needs to wear an apron for personal hygiene reasons, make sure you say it's got to be a clean apron in order to get the mark. It's really important that you can identify why some foods are higher risk than others. So anything that is moist, anything that is high in protein, so any meat, poultry, fish, egg, dairy product is going to be high risk. You do need to try and remember the name of some types of food poisoning. Salmonella, you're all quite confident with. Other common ones are Listeria and E. coli, and they're the easier ones to spell, of course. Campylobacter is a food poisoning that is also common in chicken, along with Salmonella. Alongside knowing what the food poisoning categories are, you need to know what symptoms of food poisoning might be. So there is some cartoons to remind you of those as you're revising this evening. Linked to food safety is how we store that food. So words that you need to be aware of are perishable and ambient. Perishable foods are those foods that have to be kept in a fridge or a freezer because they're high risk and because they might spoil quickly. Anything kept in ambient storage means it's all right to be kept at room temperature, so that's anything that's in a tin or is dry food like dry pasta and dry rice. Any food that is being stored, remember, must be covered up to stop other contamination getting into it. Memorising the colour of the chopping board is really crucial. We saw in the mock that you weren't as a group confident on what a yellow chopping board is used for, so make sure you have revised the 6 colours because any one of those questions could pop up. We've revised and practiced how to explain how to use a food temperature probe in lessons. There's a diagram here that explains the whole process as well, because it's certainty that you will get that question in this paper. We've also revised nutritional needs and health, and we know that our go-to framework for eating healthily is the Eat Well guide, and I've put a larger version on the next slide for you to look at in case you need to revise that as well. We've talked about different life stages throughout the course. The life stage that crops up specifically in this paper is about elderly people. So you need to think about what happens to elderly people once they get over the age of 65. And it's all about slowing down, the rest of their body not working quite so well, and their appetite reduces, and they might not be able to eat healthily because they can't go and shop, or they can't stand up long enough to cook the food. They might also get extra conditions like osteoporosis and any of the cardiovascular diseases. When we're talking about nutrition, they normally pick one of the macronutrients to talk about in detail. In this paper, it's protein. So remember that proteins are chains of amino acids. Remember those crucial numbers. We need 28 amino acids in our human body, but 9 of those we have to eat. So they're not going to come from anywhere else. We have to eat them in the food that we eat. Non-essential amino acids are made in the human body. As well as that, there are 2 qualities of protein. We've got high biological value proteins, which are your animal proteins, and low biological value proteins, which are your plant proteins. If you were a vegetarian or a vegan, you would need to make sure you were joining different types of low biological value proteins together, because low biological value proteins don't have all 9 of the essential amino acids. A good example we come to over and over again is the idea of having beans on wholemeal toast. As always, diet, nutrition and health crops up in this paper, and you need to have an awareness of the effects that eating too much of particular foods or not enough of other foods can affect your body. I'm just going to leave you to flick through this at your own pace. Something we haven't talked about for a little while is energy balance, and that involves the idea that the fuel that you take into your body through food needs to match the fuel that you burn off in staying alive and physical activity in order for you to maintain a stable body weight. That calculation is based on your basal metabolic rate, which is the natural rate at which you burn off energy when you are at complete rest. It's then multiplied with your physical activity level, which depends on how active you are during the day, to give you a calculation called your total energy expenditure. The energy that you put out must be matched by the energy that you put in if you're going to maintain your body weight. If you eat more power, more fuel, more energy than you burn up, over time, that's how weight gain happens. If you eat less fuel than you burn up, over time, weight loss happens. Something that hasn't cropped up for a little while but does crop up in this paper is about food labelling and marketing influences, and the idea that foods have to be, by law, labelled with particular information. So by law, food labels must have the name of the food on there, the list and the quantity of ingredients, any allergens, the weight of the food, the use by or best before dates, any storage and instructions for use. It must have the name and address of the food business operator so that if the food doesn't perform correctly, they can be contacted, and it must also have nutritional information. It's the allergens that we need to particularly focus on in this paper, and I have put the most popular allergens in bold in the box you can see. All of these 14 types of food have to be listed legally, but the ones in bold are the ones that are easiest for us to remember because they are the most common food allergens. So an example of the sort of question you might see about labelling is on the screen. So again, by a process of elimination, you can work out which one is not required for food labelling. So do the cooking instructions have to be there? Does the list of ingredients need to be there? Or the serving suggestions or the weight? And we can see from the previous slide that it's the serving suggestions are not a legal requirement. There is a question about food labelling further on in the paper as well. This is not exactly the same question, but what it is a nice question that shows you and proves to you that there is that legal requirement that foods that are allergens have to be listed on labels in bold. And the question is asking you why you would need to highlight the allergens in bold. It's a fairly common sense answer, but I'm going to leave you with the next slide for you to read through the options you could have written. How food is cooked and why it is cooked is covered in every single exam paper. So the list that you need to continue to memorise about why we cook food, number one, to make it safe, but also to develop flavours and things, is at the bottom of this slide. The three methods of heat transfer you should remember are conduction, convection and radiation. And there's normally a question where you're asked to explain what conduction is, which essentially is heat travelling through metal into the food, or convection, where the heat has to travel through water or air to get to the food. So if we're boiling anything, that's convection. In the same way, if we're baking in the oven, that's convection because the heat is travelling through the air in the oven. Or radiation, where the heat directly radiates towards the food and doesn't go through another surface. So a toaster is a really good example, or also a barbecue. There's always a question about cooking methods. In this paper, it's about the dry cooking methods, so ones where we don't use oil and we don't use water. So I've got some pictures there to remind you what those dry cooking methods are. Another cooking technique that crops up is the idea of caramelization, which is the idea that sugars in food or pure sugar itself will turn brown when it is heated. It will melt and then eventually it will go a golden brown colour, and if you continued to heat it, it would go a really dark brown colour. We talk about caramelization in sweet products, so you can see there's some caramel made by melted sugar in the picture, but also if sugar is on the top of products. Some foods have got natural sugars in them and will naturally caramelize when we fry them. So it's the same process happening when we fry an onion. When it starts to go golden and then a little bit browner, that's caramelization, because it's the sugars getting heated and then melting and turning a darker colour. You're going to be asked about caramelization in the context of a particular recipe. The recipe is this one, so I'm going to leave you with that. Then, of course, we get the really long 12 marker. Now, I've modelled this to you in lessons, so you've seen how to break down those 12 marks into manageable paragraphs, and you've also seen that you might not fit those 12 marks into the space available in the paper. They give you about just over 1.5 sides of lines. Don't think that you have to stop at the end of the second slide. Please use the extra paper at the back if you need to. Remember, the technique I've shown you is to highlight the keywords so that you know exactly what you're talking about and can really focus you, and that might help you plan your paragraphs. So in this example, you might want to talk about what a 25-year-old active male needs before talking about what he then needs in terms of actual foods and analysing the meals in front of you. So highlight what you need to talk about in the question. Then when you look at the ingredients list or the menu that's in front of you, highlight the good and bad points, rag them. So there's always going to be good points about some dishes and bad points about some dishes. It's your task to evaluate overall which menu, which dish is better for the customer based on who that customer is. So we've modelled this in lessons and you've seen me write the answer and written the answer yourself. It won't be Bradley this time. It will be a different type of customer, but the method of analysing the food is exactly the same. We've talked about primary and secondary food processing lately. The questions on this paper focus on primary processing. And when we talk about primary foods, we're talking about the foods that don't need to be changed very much to be eaten. So it's the foods that are not processed into other food products. Things like fruit and vegetables, wheat that's been turned into flour, and milk. Foods like that, eggs maybe, would go through primary processing. What's listed in the bullet points is all the processes that might happen during the primary processing routine. Particularly transportation of the food can be significant for the environment. The environment crops up quite a lot in this particular paper, starting with some fairly simple questions about genetically modified food. So the information on this slide will help you to begin to prepare for those questions about the environment. The infographic shows you the foods that have the most and least impact on the environment and the ones that we should try and eat more of or eat less of. In general terms, we're advised that meat and fish products and poultry are more harmful for the environment, so we should be trying to extend our appetite for plant-based foods. We're going to talk about sustainability in a minute, but on this slide we've got the particular points that are related to sustainability in food. And all of these issues are affected by food production and consumption around the world. So there is evidence that food production is adding to climate change and global warming. The way we eat particular foods is becoming less and less sustainable. So if we continue to eat meat at the rate we eat meat around the world, we're not going to be able to breed enough of those animals without impacting plant growth. The problems of not having enough land for growing food are significant around the world. Climate change is making it more difficult to grow food around the world due to all of the extreme weather conditions. And then there is scientific developments in something called genetically modified foods that some people agree with and some people don't agree with. Genetically modified food is a food where the genes have been altered by scientists so that the food does a slightly different job or performs in a slightly different or better way than it would do naturally. So it might stop foods from rotting as quickly, it might mean that they grow to a better colour or more. There's some examples of sustainability questions on this slide. I'm just going to leave the video running and animate the right answers for the first 3 in a second. So you might have worked those out by a process of elimination, or you might have known the right answer. We particularly need to discuss food security in a little while. That's the idea that people are going to be able to have enough food to eat and that they're going to be able to afford to buy it. And I'm just going to show you the answers for the advantages and disadvantages of genetically modified foods on the next slide. Some people are absolutely fine with the idea of genetically modified foods, but when they were first publicised, there was quite a lot of public outroar about them. So I'll let you read through the advantages and the disadvantages, and you need to remember at least 3 of each in order to be successful in the PPE. And now we return to food security, which is ensuring that we, in our current generation and future generations, are going to have enough food to eat without causing harm to the environment and being able to eat, to be able to afford to buy that food. The sustainability of food starts from the moment that it starts being grown, to it being farmed, to it being gathered, and to it being going out into the supply chain and transported to shops or restaurants. You can't avoid the fact that food production causes greenhouse gases. The more and more food that needs to be farmed or bred is going to release more and more carbon dioxide and other gases into the atmosphere. Because the world's population is increasing, we need more food. And you should know from science and geography that the increase in the gases from the farming of food is being trapped in our atmosphere, causing global warming, which then in turn has a knock-on effect to climate change, causing drought in some areas and flooding in other areas. Both of those issues affect food production. If there's drought, then the plants won't grow because there's not enough water. If there's flooding, the plants will be washed away and won't get an opportunity to photosynthesize. If the land is affected, it's not just crops that are affected, it's also the animals who would be fed those crops in order to produce our eggs and our meat and our milk. So how do these issues affect food security? So I've just summarised the effects that might happen through climate change and the weather on our soil and our farmland, but just to give some examples of that, this is what might happen in the case of flooding. So it can pollute the soil in the farmland because sewage and other rubbish gets onto the farms. It can pollute the water supplies, which cause waterborne diseases into our animals, into us, into our plants. Livestock can drown. So livestock covers farming of cattle and beef and sheep and lamb. And then there could also be landslides which destroy the plant crops, the livestock and the farmland. So flooding can have a devastating effect on our food supply. And we've encountered in recent years problems with food supply. Most recently, I believe that there is a shortage of bananas in Tesco's. Extreme weather also damages our crops, continuing the idea of polluting the water and soil, causing the death of livestock, which can then lead to food shortages and hunger for people who can't get the foods. If there's food shortages, and we see this a little bit in our country, the less food there is, the higher costs there are, because the food either needs to be imported or it is in such demand that they put the prices up to make it more competitive. Climate change is affecting how plants themselves grow, even if there isn't any disastrous weather conditions. Because of the growth in, or the increase in the Earth's temperature, plant crops are growing at different times of year, which affects pollination and therefore being able to make more crops in future years. One of the reasons we're being encouraged to eat more plant food is because animals who are being farmed need huge amounts of food themselves, and they need space to be reared, which is causing deforestation. Deforestation causes issues with destruction of natural habitats, but it also compounds the issue of global warming because the trees aren't there to absorb the carbon dioxide that is being produced by animals and the production of plants. Farming itself can damage the environment because if they're using chemical pesticides and fertilizers, that can pollute the land, the water and the air and affect little ecosystems of bugs and things which the birds need to eat on. After the food has been grown and gathered and collected, it then needs to be processed. It might need to be manufactured into different types of food. It needs to be refrigerated. It needs to be packaged, and then it needs to be transported to our shops and our restaurants, as I've said previously. All of those things involve the use of non-renewable fossil fuels, which produce carbon dioxide. So each stage of the food production process is damaging our environment. At the end of the food production process, in the food use process, there's the issue of food waste. So certainly in more economically developed countries, we value our food less and we consider what we throw away less, and that causes food waste. It is biodegradable, so okay, it's not as bad as plastic waste, but as it biodegrades, it's releasing even more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, therefore compounding the issue of climate change and global warming. Part of the exam is you then being able to suggest how we can make things better. And food producers certainly can make a difference because they can research the use of biodegradable packaging, reduce the need for unnecessary packaging. We're seeing that in supermarkets a little bit, but certainly not enough. And they could also consider the way that they farm the foods by using less chemicals, growing organic vegetables rather than using those chemicals, and encouraging us to eat plant-based products by making them more easily available than meat. The biggest responsibility for making sure that food production doesn't continue to damage our environment actually sits with the consumer though, which is all of us. So if those issues affect food security, we can try and make some changes as well. And I'm just going to leave you there to consider what those areas are, and I would advise you to pick 5 that you're most familiar with and memorize those to discuss in the exam. Thank you for listening, Year 11. I hope that was helpful. Hope you get lots of rest overnight, come in very energized with lots of nutritious fuel in your system. I'll be available in the hall Monday lunchtime with some activities to do to warm you up. If you've got any questions, just email myself or Miss Rolfe over the weekend. Good luck.